2020, a year most famous for the COVID-19 pandemic, TikTok exploding as a platform,
Buddy is literally gritting on the frozen wake,
and Hamilton, Verstappen and Bottas terrorising Formula One podiums. With over half of the races in that 2020 season featuring these three on the podium on their journey to becoming the most prominent podium trio in Formula One's history. So dominant, in fact, that they became a meme. Which is why today we are going to be giving a different perspective on that 2020 championship. By removing those three from each and every race across the season, we'll have plenty of new podium sitters and race winners and find out just who could have been champion that season if the most common rostrum in F1's history didn't exist. Just a quick disclaimer before we get into this one. This video was originally just supposed to be the 2020 season without Mercedes. However, I calculated that championship and Max Verstappen literally wins every single race bar one that he didn't DNF in and just wins the championship by miles. So I decided to remove him as well, and it's a good thing too because what remained is definitely the best championship that we've had on this channel so far. The season opener takes us to Austria in what is a very topsy-turvy calendar due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but it gave us an absolutely stunning race to start off this season. Daniel Ricciardo, Lance Stroll, Kevin Magnussen, Romain Grosjean, George Russell, Kimi Räikkönen and Daniel Kvyat all retiring from this race, and one Alex Albon, who spun all on his own at turn 4 before also retiring from this race, meant that it was anyone's game for the win. But the man who rose to the top and clinched the opening race win of the season was none other than Ferrari's Charles Leclerc. Battling past Sergio Perez with just 5 laps to go in the race, he went on to seal the victory. Perez actually ended up falling off the podium towards the end of the race behind both of the McLaren drivers, Norris in P2 who got the fastest lap point and Sainz picking up P3. And this would actually be Lando Norris's first ever podium in Formula One, Carlos Sainz's second ever podium in Formula One, and this is Charles Leclerc's third win in Formula One. Sergio Perez, as I mentioned, falling off the podium towards the end of the race and finishing in P4. We've got Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon in P5 and 6 ahead of a lovely P7 finish for Antonio Giovinazzi. It's a slightly poor weekend for Sebastian Vettel, whose teammate literally won this race and he's all the way down in P8. Nicholas Latifi on F1 debut picks up points despite being the last finisher on the road in this race, and Daniel Kvyat, who retired from the race, actually manages to pick up points as well, given how many people had DNF'd and that he finished over 90% of the race distance. In our Drivers' Championship, of course, the standings just reflect that opening race, and in the Constructors' Championship, McLaren have taken that early lead. Round 2 of the season takes us from Austria to Austria for the Styrian Grand Prix, where last race's winner, Charles Leclerc, collides with his teammate Sebastian Vettel on the opening lap, seeing him immediately out of the race. And our race winner here was none other than Alex Albon, picking up his first ever Formula One win and atoning for his mistakes last time out, after battling off P3 man Sergio Perez towards the end of the race. Perez actually picked up damage in that fight with Alex Albon, which ended up dropping him behind Lando Norris as well for P2, who had actually managed to overtake both Racing Point cars on the last lap of the race to secure that P2. Perez, Stroll and Daniel Ricciardo were all covered by just under a tenth of a second as they crossed the line, ahead of P6 man Carlos Sainz, who got the point for the fastest lap here. Daniel Kvyat actually managed to finish the race this time to get points, and he got a nice P7 finish ahead of Kimi Räikkönen in P8 and a double point finish for Haas to round us out. This gives Lando Norris the lead of the championship after his back-to-back P2 finishes at both Austrian Grand Prix, and Sergio Perez is in P2 with just 3 points separating second down to 5th. Stroll and Ricciardo gain big positions here, and further down the order, we can see that George Russell is the only driver yet to score points this season. And in the Constructors' Championship, McLaren currently have a big lead out front ahead of the chasing pack led by Racing Point. Red Bull are up 4 positions after Alex Albon's win. Of course, Red Bull could just be replaced by Alex Albon because it is just him on that team, But as I said, I think this championship is better without Max Verstappen. Sorry, Max Verstappen fans. And we've also got Haas moving ahead of Williams. Our third round of the season takes us to the Hungarian Grand Prix, where a wet start was navigated perfectly by our race winner, Lance Stroll, who on his way to victory also managed to pick up the point for the fastest lap, meaning that he had an absolutely perfect weekend and actually finished 20 seconds ahead of P2. Alex Albon follows up his win last time out with a second place here, and Sebastian Vettel recovered from a slow pit stop early in the race to get his first podium of the season for Ferrari in P3. Sergio Perez picks up P4 ahead of back-to-back P5 finishes for Daniel Ricciardo, back-to-back P6 finishes for Carlos Sainz, and Kevin Magnussen gets Haas's best result of the season in P7. Leclerc is P8 ahead of Daniel Kvyat in P9, who maintains his 100% scoring record to start this season, and championship leader Lando Norris is all the way down in P10. All this means that Alex Albon takes the lead of the Drivers' Championship, with Perez, Stroll and Norris all split by just 1 point for P2. Leclerc loses substantial ground here as Daniel Ricciardo and Sebastian Vettel both make up positions, and in the bottom half we can see that Kevin Magnussen has made up 3 places. In the Constructors' Championship, Racing Point take the lead by 7 points over McLaren, with those two teams absolutely miles away from those behind them. The British Grand Prix in 2020 brought us a dramatic end to the race. Carlos Sainz was running in P2, however his tyre exploded with 2 laps to go and forced him into a late pit stop, which dropped him all the way down to P10. Also, Daniel Ricciardo battled his way past Lando Norris to pick up that P2 spot. But nothing was stopping our race winner today. Charles Leclerc led from the front after a tough couple of rounds. This was just what he needed to get his season back on track, with Ricciardo, as I mentioned, in P2 and Lando Norris in P3. Ocon gets a season best result in P4, making it a very solid weekend for the Renault boys, and Pierre Gasly picks up his second P5 finish of the season so far. Alex Albon picked up the point for the fastest lap ahead of last race's winner Lance Stroll. Sebastian Vettel got P8, and George Russell's P9 finish means that everyone on the grid has scored a point now. Charles Leclerc's win here takes him up 5 positions to retake that championship lead, but he's just 1 point ahead of Lando Norris in P2, who is just 1 point ahead of Alex Albon in P3. Sergio Perez drops 3 places in the championship after this round because he missed it entirely. Having been diagnosed with COVID, he was replaced by Nico Hülkenberg for this round. However, Hülkenberg was unable to start the race due to a car fault. The Renault drivers both gain positions on page 1, and on page 2, we can see that George Russell has moved ahead of Romain Grosjean. And in the Constructors' Championship, McLaren have retaken the lead after this round, as Renault move past Alex Albon's Red Bull. We stay at Silverstone for the 70th anniversary Grand Prix, where Charles Leclerc makes it back-to-back wins in the UK, rising from P5 on the grid to take the win, ahead of Alex Albon in P2, who picked up fastest lap on his way there, and Lance Stroll rounds out our podium in P3. Nico Hülkenberg was still standing in for Sergio Perez this weekend, and actually managed to score his second pole position of his entire career. He led a large chunk of the race, but was unfortunately not able to see it through, and actually fell off the podium entirely to miss out on yet another podium in his career. Will he ever manage to get a podium? Esteban Ocon and Lando Norris finished ahead of both Alpha Tauris, with Sebastian Vettel in P9 recovering from a turn 1 spin, and Carlos Sainz rounds out the points in P10. Charles Leclerc's win here retains him the lead in the Drivers' Championship, of course, as Alex Albon's P2 finish moves him ahead of Lando Norris. A decent couple of rounds in the UK from Esteban Ocon promote him to P8 in the championship, and on page 2 we can see that Nico Hülkenberg has pushed himself up to P12 with his stand-in performance. In the Constructors' Championship, Racing Point have retaken the lead, with Ferrari moving up into P2 thanks to Charles Leclerc's back-to-back wins, and McLaren dropping down to P3. Also, Alex Albon's Red Bull have moved ahead of Renault. The Spanish Grand Prix comes next, and with it comes our first 1-2 finish of the season, won by Racing Point. And it's none other then Lance Stroll taking home the win, picking up his second win of the season, and Sergio Perez comes home in P2 to get a lovely podium on his return from COVID. Carlos Sainz gets his second podium of the season in P3, with Sebastian Vettel in P4 for Ferrari, his teammate and championship leader Charles Leclerc retiring from the race around the halfway point due to an engine issue. Sebastian Vettel all the way down to Daniel Kvyat in P9 were separated by just 4 seconds as they came across the line, with Sebastian Vettel utilising an ambitious one stop, and we've got Esteban Ocon in P10 rounding out the points. With that win, Lance Stroll takes over the lead in the Drivers' Championship in a sentence I quite frankly never thought I'd be saying, but it does mean that we've already had 4 championship leaders from 4 different teams in just 6 races. Leclerc's DNF drops him down to P3 as Sainz, Vettel and Gasly all gain places after this round. All remains the same in the bottom half of the championship, and in the Constructors' Championship, with that 1-2 finish, Racing Point have absolutely flown away at the top, with Ferrari and McLaren level on points behind. Round 7 brings us to the Belgian Grand Prix, where we have our second 1-2 of the season so far. This one led by Daniel Ricciardo, as it's Renault who get a 1-2 here, and Daniel of course picking up his first race win of the season, Esteban Ocon in P2 getting his best result of the season by far as well. And it's none other than Alex Albon rounding out the podium in P3. Lando Norris in P4 was just behind Alex Albon over the line, as we've got the AlphaTauri sandwiching the racing points, Gasly picking up a lovely P5. As Raikkonen beats out Vettel for P9 and P10, and Charles Leclerc finishes another race with 0 points. Alex Albon's P3 finish here moves him back atop the Drivers' Championship, as Leclerc and Norris are now level on points for P3. Ricciardo and Ocon of course gain big positions here, as on page 2 we can see that Kimi Raikkonen has drawn level with his teammate Antonio Giovinazzi. And in the Constructors' Championship, McLaren have moved ahead of Ferrari, and now Renault are the ones that are level with them. Monza brings us our first of 3 races in Italy this season, and it's the only race that reflects the real life result, as Max Verstappen DNF'd, Hamilton had an issue with a closed pit lane, and Valtteri Bottas had no excuse. So Pierre Gasly picks up his first F1 win ahead of Carlos Sainz in P2, who picked up fastest lap as well, and Lance Stroll rounds out our podium in P3. Charles Leclerc actually crashed out of P3 in this one, making it another pointless race weekend. He hasn't scored a single point since his back-to-back race wins in Great Britain. Other notable point scorers are Nicholas Latifi and Romain Grosjean, both scoring for just the second time this season. All of this means that Lance Stroll retakes the lead in the Drivers' Championship, Lando Norris jumps up into P3, and Charles Leclerc now has Daniel Ricciardo breathing down his neck. Sainz and Gasly both move up in their close battle with Sergio Perez, and in the bottom half of the championship we can see that everything has remained the same. In the Constructors' Championship, after just 1 point in the last 2 rounds, Ferrari have dropped off massively and are now behind Renault, as AlphaTauri are making progress up to the back of Red Bull. Our second instalment of Italian races this season is at Mugello, where Alex Albon picks up his second race win of the season and even manages to get the fastest lap point on his way there. It was just 2 seconds back to Daniel Ricciardo, who picked up P2 in this one, as Alex Albon made his way past Daniel with just 8 laps to go in the race, and Sergio Perez rounds out the podium in P3. Championship leader Lance Stroll actually crashed out of this race on lap 43. Running in P2 at the time, this was a massive blow for his championship fight. Lando Norris came home in P4, and Daniel Kvyat's P5 finish is his best result of the season so far. Charles Leclerc was another to lead this race, however dropped off towards the end of the first stint, as he and teammate Vettel were split by Kimi Raikkonen, who got his best result of the year so far. And this time it's George Russell scoring for Williams, as Grosjean gets back-to-back points finishes. Alex Albon's win here and Lance Stroll's DNF sees a massive swing in the Drivers' Championship, as Lando Norris is now even closing in on the Canadian. Ricciardo takes P4, Perez takes P6, and further down we can see that Raikkonen has jumped up into P13 and Russell has drawn level with Nicholas Latifi. And in the Constructor Championship, everything remains the same. At the Russian Grand Prix, Sergio Perez becomes our 6th different race winner of the season. And in the last 5 rounds of this year, we've had 5 different race winners as well. It's absolutely kicking off. Ricciardo gets back-to-back P2 finishes ahead of Charles Leclerc, returning to the podium after a 4-race drought. However, it wasn't the cleanest ride there, as he actually took out Lance Stroll on lap 1, seeing the Canadian with back-to-back DNFs. Esteban Ocon actually led proceedings early on before dropping off of the podium, and AlphaTauri pick up a nice haul of points with Gasly getting fastest lap as well. Alex Albon recovered from a grid penalty up to P7, Giovinazzi scored for the first time since the opening round, and Kevin Magnussen scored for the first time since round 3. In the Drivers' Championship, Daniel Ricciardo has jumped up into P2, as Sergio Perez is now level with his teammate Lance Stroll for P3. Leclerc's podium takes him to just 1 point behind Lando Norris, as it's all very close in that group. And in the bottom half, we can see that Sebastian Vettel has actually dropped behind Daniel Kvyat and off of the first page. And in the Constructors' Championship, Renault's strong result here in Russia has moved them up to P2. Heading to the Nürburgring for round 11 in the championship. Oh, how I wish we still had some races here. It's Daniel Ricciardo who takes home the win. 2 P2s in the previous 2 rounds, converting to the win here with fastest lap. It's been an unreal run for Daniel in the last 3 races. Sergio Perez comes home in P2 to extend his podium streak, and Carlos Sainz finishes P3 after 2 pointless rounds himself. Pierre Gasly gets an impressive P4 ahead of Charles Leclerc in P5, and Nico Hülkenberg is back in the championship, this time replacing Lance Stroll, who will have now scored no points over the last 3 rounds, but Hülkenberg does an amazing job this time to pick up P6. Romain Grosjean gets his best result of the season in P7, as Sebastian Vettel split the 2 Alfa Romeos to round out the points. Daniel Ricciardo's win here moves him to the top of the championship, with Alex Albon DNFing here, and Charles Leclerc and Sergio Perez both make up positions as well. Carlos Sainz's podium takes him above Esteban Ocon, as on page 2 we can see Giovinazzi jumping up to P13, and Romain Grosjean has gotten ahead of the 2 Williams. And in the Constructors' Championship, AlphaTauri have made their way past Alex Albon. The Portuguese Grand Prix comes next on the calendar, where a dominant Charles Leclerc performance allows him to pick up his 4th race win of the season. Pierre Gasly picks up P2 in his 2nd podium of the season, and Carlos Sainz gets back-to-back P3s. Sergio Perez finished in P4 after recovering from a first lap spin. He had actually been running in P2, however was passed by Gasly and Sainz in the final few laps. Esteban Ocon leads home the 2 Renault drivers, and Lando Norris was all the way down in P10 in this one after an early tangle with Lance Stroll, but he managed to recover and got the fastest lap. Daniel Ricciardo maintains the lead in the Drivers' Championship, but there is just 10 points back to P2, a position shared by both Sergio Perez and Charles Leclerc. Lance Stroll has scored 0 points across the last 4 rounds, meaning that he now has Pierre Gasly just 1 point behind him and Lando Norris just 1 point behind that. Sebastian Vettel has re-entered the first page, as on page 2, we can see that Raikkonen has gotten back past Giovinazzi. And in the Constructors' Championship, everything has remained the same. Our final Italian leg of the season takes us to Imola for the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, which is won by none other than Daniel Ricciardo, our championship leader, in his 3rd race win of the season. It's actually an all Daniel/Daniil 1-2, with Daniel Kvyat taking home his first podium of the season in P2 and easily his best result of the season as well. Kvyat secured this podium with an absolutely beautiful move round the outside of P3 man Charles Leclerc, who manages to get a podium for Ferrari in Italy this season at the 3rd time of asking. Sergio Perez gets back-to-back P4 finishes ahead of both McLarens, who were ahead of both Alfa Romeos, as Nicholas Latifi scores yet again this season as his teammate George Russell dropped it under the safety car. Daniel Ricciardo's lead at the top of the Drivers' Championship is now 21 points, as both McLaren drivers moved past both Gasly and Stroll after this round. Pierre Gasly actually managed to qualify on pole at this race, and he was actually running in P2 early on. However, a mechanical failure on lap 9 saw him out of the race and unable to pick up any points. Kvyat re-enters the top half of the championship, as in the second half we can see that Raikkonen is now level with Hülkenberg and Latifi has moved away from Russell. Oh! And in the Constructors' Championship, everything remains the same. A crazy end to a crazy wet race at the Turkish Grand Prix saw Charles Leclerc dive-bombing Sergio Perez at one of the final corners of the race, locking up, allowing Sergio to cut back underneath him, and his teammate Sebastian Vettel, allowing Sergio Perez to take home the win, Sebastian Vettel picking up P2, and Charles Leclerc rounded out the podium in P3. Ferrari's first double podium of the season was actually followed very closely home by Carlos Sainz in P4, who, thanks to Leclerc's mistake, was actually very close behind him, under a second over the line. Albon was in P5, Norris in P6 with the fastest lap, and Lance Stroll in P7, qualified on pole for this one, led a decent chunk of the race, but then just fell off after his second pit stop, and only managed P7. All of this means that Sergio Perez is now just 3 points off of Daniel Ricciardo's lead in the Drivers' Championship. Charles Leclerc is close behind them in P3, we've got the McLaren battle hotting up, and Sebastian Vettel's podium puts him back onto page 1. The bottom half of the Drivers' Championship and the Constructors' Championship have both remained the same after this one. However, both Ferrari and McLaren are closing in on Renault at this stage. Round 15 of the championship takes us to the Bahrain Grand Prix, and the Bahrain Grand Prix in 2020 is simply impossible to talk about without mentioning that horrific first lap Romain Grosjean crash. Watching back that incident in preparation for this video just made me so thankful that Romain was able to get out of that car. And it's quite frankly unbelievable that he did manage to survive. When you watch that incident, it is so chilling. But the drama in the race itself came just 3 laps from the end, when Sergio Perez, in the lead of the race, on course to lead the Drivers' Championship after this race, retired with an engine failure. Absolutely heartbreaking scenes for the Mexican. This paved the way for Alex Albon to pick up his 3rd race win of the season, with Lando Norris in P2 and Carlos Sainz in P3. Pierre Gasly picks up P4 after 2 pointless rounds on the bounce, Daniel Ricciardo gets P5 with the fastest lap point, and George Russell scores for just the 3rd time this year. In the Drivers' Championship, Ricciardo's lead is 14 points heading into the final 2 rounds, as there is just 1 point between P2 and P3. And Pierre Gasly makes his way past Lance Stroll, who has scored just 6 points across the last 7 rounds of the season. The bottom half sees Russell drawing level with teammate Latifi, and in the Constructors' Championship, we can see that McLaren are only 2 points behind Renault. The penultimate round of the championship keeps us in Bahrain, but gives us a different circuit layout for the Sakir Grand Prix in what is one of my favourite Grand Prix of all time. It seemed like Sergio Perez's luck had completely run out. After his DNF last time, he was then taken out on lap 1 by championship rival Charles Leclerc. This incident saw Leclerc out of the race. However, what followed was a masterful drive by Sergio Perez, going all the way from last on the first lap to first at the end of the race to pick up his 3rd race win of the season in what is easily his best drive of his career. Esteban Ocon grabs P2 to equal his best result of the year, and Lance Stroll returns to the podium in P3. Crucially for the championship, Daniel Ricciardo finds himself all the way down in P5 in this one, which means that with 1 round left to go, there is just 2 points in it as Sergio Perez takes the lead of the championship away from Daniel Ricciardo. And with 2 points in it going into the final round, really it's anyone's game. The battle for P3 is level on points, the McLarens are split by just 3 points, and Sebastian Vettel has moved back onto page 1. And in the bottom half, oh yeah, Jack Aitken and Pietro Fittipaldi raced in this race. However, they didn't really bother the points. And in the Constructors' Championship, Racing Point have a 43-point lead over P2, which means that they literally just need 1 point in the final round to secure the championship. And in the final round of the championship, in Abu Dhabi, the title-defining moment happened on lap 9. Under the sunset in Abu Dhabi, Sergio Perez started 8 places behind Daniel Ricciardo, and so had it all to do in the race. Having made his way up a few positions in the opening few laps, his car decided to give up on him on lap 9, and with it went his championship hopes. Which of course means that Daniel Ricciardo's P4 finish here with the fastest lap point takes him back atop the championship to win the Drivers' Championship, his first of his career. What a moment for the Aussie. Alex Albon was the man to win the final race of the season, taking him level with Charles Leclerc on 4 wins apiece, them being the winningest drivers of the season, and Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz round out the podium, replicating our podium that we had a couple rounds ago. And here we have confirmation of the final standings in the Drivers' Championship. Ricciardo with the title, Albon just 2 points behind Perez in the end for P2, and Norris and Sainz level on points to end the season, with Norris ahead due to having more P2 finishes. And in the Constructors' Championship, Lance Stroll managed to score the points needed for Racing Point to take home the championship, so at least Sergio Perez gets to celebrate something, and Renault managed to hold off McLaren by just 2 points. What a championship. And if you'd like to watch another, then look no further than the 2023 championship without the horrifying dominance of Red Bull.